Welcome to the big ticket official election prediction for the 2024 presidential election. I am joined by Josh and Mark. We are going to be giving our opinions, our thoughts on the state of the race just under 2 weeks from election day at the time of recording this video. So let's go ahead and start this out. We're going to be doing a panel discussion to start out the video. So, how do you guys see the state of this race at this moment in time?
With just 2 weeks left before the election, it's really anyone's race to lose. It's very, very close right now. I mean, in terms of the popular vote in the Electoral College, it's a complete toss up. We're looking at a situation where no matter how the popular vote goes, the state of Arizona could vote just ever so slightly to the left or right and decide the next president. It's really coming down to these individual voters in these individual states. There's no general trend like, say, in 2016 or 2020 where there was an attitude you could get up. It's a complete toss up because of that. There's no easy trend to just pick up on. Some groups are going left, some groups are going right. The polls are all over the place. I mean, it's just kind of crazy. Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, I have to agree with you. This is a complete dead heat toss up from what I've been seeing everywhere, from the polls to what the vibes are in general to just how people in like Pennsylvania are feeling. Because I've been to Pennsylvania. I've even been to states like North Carolina over the past summer, and it's just the vibe of it all is just that it's a complete toss up in all of these swing states. And these are the states that ultimately decide the election. Now, I mean, I'm trying to think of what I'm trying to say
It's
next.
okay.
I'm sorry.
I can stall. I agree. And I mean, what's even crazier is the popular vote has been around within 1 to 2 points in Harris's direction. Like, for example, today there was the Monmouth poll, Harris +3. There was a Tip Insights tracking poll, Harris +2. But don't forget that for Democrats, a neutral environment is a +3. If Harris only gets +3 in the popular vote, that's basically a toss up. If it's +2 or under, Trump wins.
Well,
Absolutely. And I just want to give a little insight as to the absolute state of the polling in this race so far. If you go to the Real Clear Politics national vote average, I mean, we're seeing polls anywhere from Trump +3 to Harris +3, and it really is all over the place, and it's not really leaning in any one clear direction. Uh, I've been looking at elections for really paying attention for the past two, including 2022, I'd say three. And I really, in this short time, I just have not seen an election just so utterly. I have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me so much of the Virginia 2021 governor race, where we're sitting around. It feels like the Democrats should probably win, but then there's all this data slowly trickling in that makes you think, well, wait a minute, are the Republicans going to pull it off? I mean, it's not like I remember there was the insane Youngkin +8 Fox News poll, which was ridiculous, but
Yeah,
there was also the Trafalgar Group, which was right on point, the Fox 5 Insider Advantage. And I'm just looking at it now, and it reminds me, if you look at the trends, that McAuliffe was up and he just slowly started to dip down as Youngkin just got all this momentum at the last second. And you look at the national, and you see the same thing with Trump. Trump is surging right now, and Harris is starting to drop. She's up by zero point 0.2 in the RCP average, and don't forget, it's only a 3 point. Anything under 3 points is a Trump win. Right now, if the polls hold up nationally, it looks very good for Trump. But I will note, I don't necessarily think the national environment is going to translate to the state level environment. Because in 2022, Republicans did decent in the midterms on the national level, but they underperformed on the state level. And it's
that's exactly what I was going to say. Yeah, that's
that's a good
exactly what I was
point.
going to say.
Republicans won 2.8% of the popular vote. They had 51% despite winning a 2% victory. So they should have done better in the House relative to the votes relative to what they got essentially. In the Senate, same way. It's very surprising in that regard that happened, and a lot of it had to do with the localization of elections. There was an interesting special on the news a few nights ago about these ballot referendums and how they're exciting younger voters to come out and vote, even if they don't necessarily care, because they get the vote like on an issue like abortion, where in the past it was a little more higher up in like the courts and the government. Now it's on these referendums. Suddenly they're more energized to show up and vote, because even if they may not have shown up for like a specific candidate, they're going to show up for the issue. And I think that's what these national polls can't show. They can't show the localization effect of a post Dobbs world.
Yeah,
I
and
see. I see.
I do want to go into the numbers real quick.
Sure.
And on this date in 2016, the national popular vote had Clinton up by 5.9%.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2020, the national popular vote was for Biden was up by 8 points exactly. Right now, it is a dead heat toss up. It is by 0.2% up for Harris. But I will say, and I agree with Josh wholeheartedly, that this isn't going to really translate, this national vote isn't going to really translate to how these swing states are going to vote. Personally, the way I see it, I think some swing states are going to go to Harris, and I think some swing states are going to go to Trump.
Big
And
if
I'm not,
true.
yeah, I'm gonna save like what I actually think for each state until like the end of the video where we're actually gonna make like our bold predictions. But it is important to note that these elections are going to be more localized. And I think also you have all these referendums that are happening, not just on abortion either, but there's also referendums on marijuana legalization that are going to be in states like Wisconsin and North Carolina. And there's going to be all these referendums, and I do have to see the I had to see the video where where all these referendums are mentioned. I know Mr. Beat, he made a nice YouTube short about about like saying like where all the referendums were. I do highly recommend you check out that YouTube short. But he mentioned all the referendums. I think the biggest amount of referendums are going to be on marijuana legalization, and I think those are especially on Wisconsin and North Carolina. Those are going to be like big referendums that might drive out more younger people based on the issue.
Yeah, and I would say not just drive them out, but it makes the elections more. Where like instead of just being like, oh, I'm going to vote for the Democrat, or I'm going to vote for the Republican because that's just who I vote for. Now it's like, okay, how are my local Like it makes you care more about your local politics, and that has an upward effect on how you vote on the federal level, versus the federal level just pushing you down to vote. However, down ballot voting, it almost creates up ballot voting when you have these elections. Just look at Pennsylvania in 22 with Mastriano and the effect he had upward. He created this like momentum on up higher level elections, like in the Senate, and with like Pennsylvania, Susan Wild won in a shocking twist. She was supposed to lose, and she won, and won quite well because of these issues were so important in the Allentown area. And that was a race I was watching very closely because I was in the area at the time. And I remember attending the debate even and talking to some staffers who were there for both sides, and they both told me they felt that Wild was not going to do well in the election at this moment. And, that proved to not be true. And I think that effect does not show in the polling, and it's not going to necessarily show in the polling, and that's bad for Trump. I think it favors Harris, these localization effect at the state level. And
I see.
there's been a lot of interesting early voting as well. The early voting in Nevada has looked very well for Trump. If any of you have been looking at it.
Absolutely. The early vote for Republicans, the states that I've looked at in particular, it's really just the Sun Belt: Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, and I'm going to include Florida in that as well. And I just want to, as a resident of Florida, I want to talk about Florida for a minute.
Yeah, go for it.
The early vote data in Florida. Now, let me preface this by saying that Florida exists within its own little bubble. This is not going to translate, for the most part, to the rest of the nation. Florida has, I believe, voted in terms of early vote. It is currently sitting at R plus about 25.
Wow.
And before in-person early voting started, the Democrats had an advantage of around 7 points. That has flipped, and now the Republicans are leading with combined mail-in voting and early in-person. They're leading 7 points in the state of Florida. Now, on a more local level, a few counties I just want to bring up. Miami-Dade is voting plus 15 for the Republicans in early voting, which is absolutely insane. In terms of the overall mail-in, in-person combined, Republicans are on track to flip Tampa tomorrow which is insane. They flipped Pinellas County, which is just is on the West Coast, just hit by Hurricane Milton. I would know. And it just flipped for the Republicans. It is now currently at about R plus 1.5, which is unprecedented. All of these counties went for Democrats by large margins in 2020. So Florida's deep red. I'll say that. Now, one last thing on Florida is Duval County, which is the county for Jacksonville in northern Florida. This also, early in-person, mail-in voting combined, has flipped for the Republicans. Now, the reason that this is significant is I've heard from select analysts on Twitter. I forget exactly who, but I read a little piece on this earlier that this is actually a good sign for Trump in Georgia, given how close Jacksonville is to Georgia and how the demographics are similar in that area. So is it true? Is it not true? I can't say personally. I just think it's an interesting thing to think about. But what do you guys think about the early voting?
So I want to call out Pennsylvania if we're going to talk about early voting, because I think while Florida is important, and I think what you said is really good, I will note that in terms of trends, I think there's some important stuff happening in Pennsylvania that so as of today, Republicans in 2020, they've almost doubled their early ballot voting from 22. According to this one source, Democrats have gone down by 26% in 2020 and increased by 21% from 22. In comparison, they're up 30% in 2020 and have had a 100% increase in 22 relative to how they voted last year. Now, I don't know if that 100% number is right, but my point being is that the early vote for Pennsylvania is looking very good for the Republicans.
Let me just say I agree completely with that.
Sorry.
I just want to comment one thing.
Yeah.
One key difference I notice in Pennsylvania specifically, but also across the board this time around, is that the Republicans and their get out to vote and their ground game this time around is significantly better than 2020. I think really in 2020, I've done a lot of just digging into the 2020 election and just kind of trying to understand what led to Biden's victory. And Biden had a robust machine, and COVID was a big part of that. But he had a robust machine, which allowed him to take those key states. And the Republicans, I think they took note of this, and they're starting to really get their own machine behind them, especially in Pennsylvania, which is interesting. But
I think a big part of 2020 was Republicans didn't adapt to the times.
No, they're always slow.
They were stuck in 2016, where they could win off like vibes and surprise, just kind of, I don't say entitlement, but they just assumed they were gonna win. There was like this assumption that all the polls were wrong like last time. We're just gonna win it, guys. We have to win it, and they didn't. And
absolutely.
There was this assumption. Now they're playing to win, and we see this because in the Pennsylvania absentee ballot request, we have had a 289,000 vote increase in the GOP and only 128,000 for the Democrats. In total, Democrats have voted have cast 1 million votes early vote, and 578,000 Republicans have voted early vote, and independents 234,000. And I don't say this in a negative way, I say this in a positive way, because Republicans are voting. The changes since 2020, only 183,000 less Republicans have voted early, while 837,000 Democrats have chosen to not vote as of I think it was yesterday. I mean, that is a big gap for the Democrats to have to catch up on. Meanwhile, Republicans, while also underperforming at this point, are still catching up. They've closed that gap, relatively speaking. Democrats are allegedly under 500,000 ballot requests. Or I'm sorry, or the gap is under 500,000.
Absolutely. And I just want to say one thing too in regards to the early vote, and then I'm going to back off for a little bit. But what you want to consider with this early vote is it's been in the back of my mind. I asked the question, a lot of Republicans, they're really getting out for the early in person this time around. That begs the question, are they cannibalizing their election day vote? And that is a question, but from the data I've seen, low propensity voters are voting at a higher rate for the Republicans than the Democrats in these swing states. Particularly, I forget if it was North Carolina or one state, or just in general. I've heard it's a trend across the board is that Republicans are turning out these low propensity voters, which, voters who have rarely voted or actually never voted, are banking the votes early in person. Good sign for them. Where the Democrats, they're actually getting, they're cannibalizing their vote more so, by a couple percentage points, I believe, in this early in person. So
That's interesting. Mark, what are your thoughts on the early vote?
Yeah, Ben, I just threw my hands up when you asked that question about Republicans cannibalizing their vote because I was just about to ask that question myself.
Well,
But
you
I,
talk
I
first.
wanted to have like kind of like a panel, a mini panel, kind of like discussing that because I really didn't have an answer for that.
It's
And it's
okay.
been a question that's been in the back of my mind. And I know like even in states like Nevada, like I've seen Nevada, and I'm gonna try and find it, something that
It's
Josh sent me.
the Nevada
And
early vote's been very good
yeah,
for Donald
and
Trump.
like it said mail and early voting update for Democrats, they've had 54,589 votes, and for Republicans there have been 52,847 votes, and for other there's been 36,470 votes. It's pretty much 50-50 between Democrats and Republicans, and that includes both early in-person and mail-in ballots. And from what I hear, Arizona is doing even better for Republicans because there's more registered Republicans in the state. And I really see states like even North Carolina, even Pennsylvania, Georgia, like these are all states these are all crucial swing states where the early vote's doing really well. But it really makes me wonder, are Republicans cannibalizing their vote? And I really never had an answer to that. I really haven't seen any data implicating whether it goes one way or the other. But
Yeah,
I
well,
personally don't know. I
in
really
the
extend that to you two. Are Republicans cannibalizing their votes?
so I will note that and I just opened it up. The Nevada Independent's been doing like hourly or every day a blog, right, about what they're seeing in the early vote. So I just
yep.
opened today's. They're saying the Clark firewall defined as how much more Clark County Dems have cast over Republicans is usually around 40,000. Before today, it was only 7.
Yeah, I want to comment on Nevada real quick.
Yeah, go for
Um,
it. I mean, this is
this
the Clark. If Clark County falls, that's the end for Kamala
I'm
Harris.
quite frankly blown away by Nevada in particular. I think it surprised me the most out of anything. Early on in the cycle earlier this year, we were seeing a lot of polling showing a Trump blowout in Nevada, which,
We all
given
got
how whether it
2022
was
PTSD.
whether it was likely or unlikely. I mean, polls have tightened everywhere across the board, but I'd kind of said back then Nevada was actually, I thought it was safe, probably Trump's easiest state, and then that flipped back. More recently, I actually changed my opinion on that, which I'm not going to share until my analysis. But now I'm seeing the data, and I'm like, okay, hold on. And there's this guy on Twitter, I forget his name, but he's the Nevada Oracle, and he's
Oh
saying
yeah.
that he predicted the Adam Laxalt, is
The
that his name?
upset. Yeah, his upset this year.
Yeah, the split between Laxalt and Lombardo in 2022.
Yeah, and
Anyway,
people lambasted him for it, including myself. I will fully admit that I was like, there is no way that Laxalt loses if the governor flips, and I was wrong.
yeah, and
Is he
he's
saying Trump
saying
wins?
no. Right now, he's saying if the Trump continues, as of the last time I checked earlier today, he's saying if this trend
Oh,
continues, the Democrats are in huge trouble,
oh,
whatever that means.
Ralston. Oh, you're talking about
Yeah.
Ralston. That's funny.
Yeah.
I have his blog open in the Nevada Independent. We're talking about the same source.
Ah, that's funny.
It's
Well,
very
anyway,
funny.
Mm.
As you can see,
yeah,
we're
he's
very
saying
coordinated. We coordinated all of this ahead of time.
no. We just got that
Yeah,
we just got that psychic
we do the ESP.
Nevada connection.
Yeah,
But anyway,
but
yeah, no, Nevada just absolutely crazy.
yeah. So and and Ralston discusses like the rural turnout in Nevada is only 13% of total, but Republicans are doing very well in the rural turnout. I think they're saying that there's a 40% Republican lead in the rural area. So he's arguing that the difference in the rural firewall as of now is larger than in Clark County, and Clark County is the key to Nevada.
Absolutely.
Mark, you are the Nevada guy. What do you think about Nevada?
Personally, like, I don't want to go too much into detail on Nevada, but like what I personally think is that Clark County is the big county right now. Like that's the big county in Nevada. That's where Las Vegas is. That's where the majority of the population is. That's the big county that everybody's going to be watching on election day. And I think personally, I'm not sure if I know the numbers for this. I'm going to try and like look real quick. But let's say in 2020, okay, so 2020, I'm having the numbers up right now. Biden won 703,000 votes, whereas Donald Trump won 669,000 votes. And Biden won by about, let's say, 2.5%. And I'm trying to see, I got like,
Wait, statewide, Republicans are up by 12,000 votes in Nevada. That's
Yep.
insane. I just opened
I know.
the data.
That's why I said Nevada.
I didn't
What the
realize
heck?
it was that big a lead. Oh wow. And the
I'm just
Clark
trying to,
firewall is smaller than the. Yeah, wow. I hadn't seen today's numbers.
I'm trying to see where, I'm trying to see the, I don't see where the data on Clark County is.
I'll send it.
But I read
to
somewhere like if
call.
like Clark County's within 6%, Donald Trump will win the state of Nevada. And
Yeah.
based on what I'm seeing with the early voting right now, if this continues, Donald Trump's going to do very well in Nevada. Although I will say, I think because since Nevada is small, it's the smallest electoral in terms of electoral votes. It's the smallest swing state. Therefore, I don't
That's
think
true.
I don't think it's as much of a priority for Donald Trump as say Pennsylvania. So I think while Donald Trump is investing in Nevada, there's no doubt. I don't think he's going to prioritize Nevada as much. Therefore, I think Nevada, if not Michigan, Nevada is going to be the easiest state for Kamala Harris to win, electorally speaking. Because I feel like that's one of the more left-leaning swing states.
Especially in the presidential elections. And something interesting about Nevada when compared to the other swing states is Nevada, I feel, is kind of the only swing state where it's really unconsequential by and large when it comes to paths to victory. Like, I don't think anyone's path to victory runs through Nevada.
No, and that's just simulating.
Unless Trump loses Georgia and wins North Carolina and Pennsylvania, then if he gets Arizona and Nevada, he wins. But that's not, like, come on, not gonna happen. But
it's unlikely.
That's a weird map. I don't see
Yeah.
a world where Trump wins Arizona and Nevada and loses Georgia.
Especially,
and what about Wisconsin and Michigan anyway? Like, yeah.
I will note that my biggest fear, and I've said this for months, is that Trump, if I'm the Trump campaign, I get Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, and lose Nebraska second, and get 268. Trump cannot win without a Rust Belt state as of now. He has zero path without a Rust Belt state, unless he wins Nebraska second.
It's true.
Yeah.
And I think that concerns me, and I think that's why some of the polls in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, the early voting data, has been good for them. But I will note that, all this talk about the numbers in Arizona and Georgia, and we're like hyping them up, but he can sweep the Sun Belt. But if he loses Wisconsin, Michigan, or Pennsylvania, he's done. He goes home. He needs to win that. He needs to win a Rust Belt.
At least one.
Right,
yeah,
or win Nebraska second. And Nebraska second is high and dry right now. They're just sitting around waiting for someone to notice them.
Nebraska second is I know Tim Walz was just in Omaha, I think, a few days ago, and I'm trying to hold off on giving my exact predictions for all these areas before my thing, but Nebraska second. It's kind of funny how one little district in Nebraska could be so consequential, and the fear is real that it does end up playing a big role in this election, which would be pretty crazy. But do you guys want to get into the actual predictions now?
So I'm actually re-recording this because if you couldn't tell from the original video, there were some audio problems on my microphone.
So let's take a second look at all the states, starting with North Carolina. North Carolina is not going to be a competitive state. I'm sorry if you think it is. The governor race there with Mark Robinson will make it a little bit more competitive, burn a little bit more money than it really needs to, but at the end of the day, no, it will not be competitive. Donald Trump will easily win the state against Kamala Harris, barring any really last minute surprises. I mean, we're 9 days from the election when I'm recording this. There's no reason as of today to think that Harris is going to somehow pull something off. I think Robinson will bury himself. He might hurt some down ballot races, but not Trump. So the first major state I want to bring up is Nevada. And Nevada is a very interesting state because in 2020, it easily went to Joe Biden. It was not a question. He won it by, I believe, 6 points. I think it actually trended to the left. Then in 2022, it actually split. And this was actually a surprise for Republicans because everybody except John Ralston, the Nevada Oracle, had said that it was going to be an easy win at both levels for the Republican. But then at the end of the day, Republicans won the governor race and the Senate race went to the Democrats, with them holding it and allowing them to win a 51-seat majority. In 2024, however, it seems to be a lot more strong for the Republicans. Now, the early day vote, as we've mentioned, is looking very good for Republicans. At the time of recording, Republicans were holding a very strong lead. I don't know the exact number as of today, but at the time, I believe they were up by 13 points, about 39,000 votes, 29,000 votes, something like that. And it has held to be mostly true. Republicans have held their majority vote. It's gotten a little closer, but we're talking like 1,000 when there's 20-something, 30-something thousand lead. So as a whole, I would argue it's not exactly a close race. But there is the big issue of cannibalism. Are Republicans eating their day of vote? Because if I vote today instead of tomorrow, Republicans didn't gain a vote. I just voted early. And to answer that, I think we have to look at the polls. The polls are the big, way of indicating what is the trend. Because if the polls were saying that it was a Kamala Harris dead heat victory, then the early voting data would be able to tell us, okay, it is in fact cannibalism. Or maybe, the polls are all just wrong. But generally speaking, we could at least point to the polls. We could point to other metrics. But state trends are showing the state moving to the right. These are 2004 numbers. The polls are showing Republicans doing very well, and again, that on its own is not enough. But the polls are showing a trend that other data backs up. So because of that, I have to give the state of Nevada to Donald Trump. But of course, Nevada can't win the election for either candidate alone. For that, we're going to have to look at two other important Sunbelt states in terms of Donald Trump's path to victory, Arizona and Georgia. In the state of Georgia, we have one major thing that gives us a reason to think Donald Trump might be able to come back. That's the polls, and that, in addition to that, is the Brian Kemp machine. If you don't know, Brian Kemp is the governor of Georgia, and he's a very powerful political figure in the state of Georgia. He built a very powerful political machine that easily won everyone down ballot a 52% or so victory, except for one person. The Herschel Walker, the Senate candidate that Trump had appointed in the 2022 midterms. That's not to say that Herschel Walker would have won if Kemp came out harder for him. Obviously, Kemp wanted a Republican victory in the Senate. But it is to say that when you aren't on Kemp's priority list, you're on your own to an extent. Herschel Walker ran alone. He didn't run with Brian Kemp. Had he run with Brian Kemp, he should have, in theory at least, generally performed at around the same level. He underperformed by 3 points. Now, in 2024, Brian Kemp and Trump have patched up their relationship. Kemp's been working hard for Trump to win. And as a whole, I do have good reason to believe that alongside the polling and just general trends within the state, once again, Joe Biden only won by a hair, and he won against a candidate who was very moderate and had a bit more of a Southern appeal. Kamala Harris doesn't have these things. She isn't the type of candidate who does well in states like Georgia. She doesn't have that appeal that Biden had. Biden had that strong appeal to African American voters, and in turn, Harris, as we've seen from the Obama speech recently, has been struggling to get those voters excited. That's not to say that they're going to vote for Donald Trump, but they're just not excited about her. She's not an exciting candidate in a state like Georgia, where they could set history by voting for her. In turn, Trump is bringing back a lot of these Republicans. He's bringing in new people in the state. He's done better with minorities than he has in the past. And because of that, I do think that Donald Trump will win the state of Georgia. The polls, the political machinery, it's all there for him to win it. The architecture for a Donald Trump victory in Georgia is there. And barring anything shocking happening, and there's a lot of excitement going on in Georgia. Early voting in Georgia has brought up almost half the total Georgia turnout. That was as of 2 days ago, according to The Hill. There is a lot of people ready to vote. And with the Brian Kemp machine alive and well, I do think a lot of that are Republicans coming home to Trump. I don't know how much of it's cannibalism. We don't have the partisan breakdown. Moving on to Arizona. Arizona is a bit of a trickier state. If you don't know, Arizona in 2020 voted for Joe Biden for the first time since Bill Clinton voting for a Democrat. But in 2018, it actually voted for a Democrat in the Senate when Kristen Sinema, in a shocking defeat, barely beat Martha McSally. In 2016, Trump also underperformed fellow Republicans, and Clinton actually did pretty well, only losing by 2 points. In 2022, Carrie Lake and Blake Masters failed to defeat their Democratic challengers, and as a result, Blake Masters did not win the Senate, and Carrie Lake just barely lost. Now, unfortunately, Carrie Lake is running again, and I do expect her to have a negative effect. I do believe there'll be a lot of split ticket voters. What's also interesting in the state of Arizona is that Trump in the polls has been doing well, but Harris has also not been getting up there. You have to remember a lot of that while Trump did improve in his 2020, he went from 48 to 49, Biden improved from 46 to 49 as well. So that is the key to who wins the election. Is Kamala Harris someone that these independents, because I believe Arizona has a majority of independents, one of the most independent states in the country, is there enough there to get Kamala Harris over the finish line? Because Clinton went from a 44%, I just looked it up, she went from a 44% to Biden getting 49. That is a 5-point swing. In comparison, Trump mostly sustained what he already had. He went up maybe like 1%, 0.5%. There is a lot of room for Harris to have to build back up to. She isn't necessarily starting at Biden's 49% and trying to push Trump down. Trump's starting at a nice floor of 48 to 49%, and he just has to convince those 5% of voters who flipped or came out that otherwise didn't to stay home or to vote for him. And he has to convince only like 1% of voters. If he can get 1% of these voters to vote for him that otherwise wouldn't have, then there's zero way that Harris can win the state. I think Trump has a higher floor than Harris. And in turn, that gives him a higher ceiling. So because of that, Arizona will go to Donald Trump. Now moving on, we have the state of Michigan. Michigan is also an interesting state. I'm not going to say too much on it for time, but essentially Michigan is not as competitive this year. I think Harris will win the state. The only way that Trump wins the state of Michigan is if enough voters stay home against Harris. The Muslim vote has been interesting in that Trump has been doing relatively decent in it in some demographic polling, but I don't think that's enough. I don't see why someone upset about the Israeli-Hamas war would then turn and vote for Donald Trump. Trump is not an anti-Israel candidate. He's actually very pro-Israel, so I don't see why they would vote for Trump based on that. I could see them voting for Trump for other reasons. Don't forget, Muslims did vote Republican up until 2004 when Bush had, obviously, after 9/11, been less than ideal candidate given everything that had happened. So I don't see why Trump would necessarily instill excitement in these voters, but there has been a few little endorsements in the Muslim community, like the mayor who endorsed Trump. But it's not necessarily because of ideological reasons as much as it is anti-Harris. If Trump wins Michigan, it's because Harris lost it, not because Trump won it. So with that being said, Michigan will go to Kamala Harris. Now, we're left with two states here, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. Let's start with Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is a very interesting state because it's a state that defined history in 2016. It flipped to Donald Trump in a shocking turn of events. It was the first time it voted Republican since, I want to say, Bush. H.W. Bush. This was something that had been a massive surprise. And the data this year for Pennsylvania is looking very strong for Republicans. The early vote has been high. The polling in Pennsylvania has indicated a decent Trump lead. RCP currently has it at Trump 0.6. However, polling like Emerson, which tends to have a little more of a liberal bias, is coming in with Trump up by 1. Anyway, the polling has been very sporadic, but it is generally showing a Trump win. It's just hard to say to what extent. I don't necessarily just trust the polling on that issue. We saw in 2022, there was this whole flood the zone idea where a lot of polls came in that boosted odds over the edge, and he won, and then it turned out that didn't happen. The polls were a little bit overinflated in that regard. However, Pennsylvania does have a lot of advantages for Trump this year. It's not a traditional Harris state. Harris is more of like a West Coast Democrat. Biden was an East Coast, mid-coast. He was from Delaware, so he was Scranton Joe. He came in, even though he lived in Delaware, he was Scranton Joe. And it's these little things that I think do give Trump an advantage there. The rural turnout in Pennsylvania, from my understanding, has been pretty decent. Again, it's hard to say because unlike, say, Nevada, where you have these great deep level analysis, in Pennsylvania, we really only have the polls. And the polls in Pennsylvania are looking decent for Trump. Morning Consult had Trump up by 2. Emerson had Trump up. So it's hard to say entirely who's going to win. And the early voting so far is good for Harris. It's generally leaning Democrat, but my understanding some of the other data is that Democrats' early voting isn't as good as it was in 2020, and so it's hard to say for sure what's going to happen. Pennsylvania is definitely a toss-up, but it's a Republican-leaning toss-up. Republicans are excited. They're voting. Even in my home state of New Jersey, they're voting in large numbers. Now, I don't want to hold the video too long, so I am going to say that Pennsylvania will go to Donald Trump just due to the polling and, again, the high turnout and excitement. The final state of the night is Wisconsin. Wisconsin is a tough one to predict. The polling for it is tied, flat tied. RCP is essentially a tie. I'm not saying, oh, it's Trump 0.6 leads now. It is a tie. The early voting data, it is hard to say. There is really no good indicator for the state of Wisconsin. If it was up to me, I'd leave it as a toss-up. The only things we can go off of as of right now are trends. And the trends aren't very helpful because we don't really know what's going on. On one hand, Wisconsin went from a safe blue state only in 2004 being competitive to being a Trump victory in 2016. In 2020, Biden won it by a hair. And then back in 2022, it again split. The Senate race going to the Republicans, Ron Johnson, and the Democrats holding the governorship with Tony Evers. So, in that regard, the polling data would make us think, oh, well, Trump might just barely eke it out. And the trends show that it is a wishy-washy state. They don't really seem to know what they want to be. On one hand, they want a Republican on the federal level, and you have the incumbency advantage in the Senate race that occurred in 2022. But on the other hand, it is a generally more Democrat state with them electing governor race, and these issues, like these localized issues, are very important in states like Wisconsin. So I don't really want to predict it, but I guess I have to. Just my job. So in that regard, with Wisconsin, it's a toss-up, and I guess what I hate about this race specifically is in 2020 in 2022 we could make these big grandiose declarations. Oh, Pennsylvania's going to go to Oz. Oh, Nevada's going to go Republican. It's not even close. Now, was that right? No. But there was data there to tell us where we think it's going. Even if we're wrong, we could at least point to the evidence and say, here's why. In 2024, you can't do that. It's a toss-up. Even the recent election wrap showed that they did it in a way that it was a toss-up. So the reality is I don't know who's going to win Wisconsin. I think Trump will win it based on current polling and data, but it's still a complete toss-up. So I would love to just leave it blank, but I guess what I'll do is I'll put it in the Trump column, but it's going to be a close one. So don't come at me if it turns out Harris wins all of the Rust Belt states, because it's going to be close. Now on to the next prediction.
All right. So personally for me, I'm just going to go off of vibes. I'm not going to go off of any polling data or early voting data or mail-in ballot data or whatever, because for me personally, this is an election that I can't really give a science to it. I need to give a gut feeling for this election. So I'm just going to go off from the states where I'm most confident about to the states where I'm least confident about. And that starts with North Carolina. Now, interestingly enough, for North Carolina over the summer, I've actually been down there, especially in the Northwest area, where, of course, Hurricane Helene hit that area of North Carolina. And I think based on the lack of the federal government's response, and I think a lot of these pollsters that are just writing off the rural areas there in northwestern North Carolina, I think these people are going to be very determined to go out and vote. And I think through that, I think I'm going to just off of vibes, I think I see a red North Carolina this election cycle. In fact, I think it's going to be lean Republican. I think it's going to go lean Republican. So, and that gives 16 electoral votes to Trump. Then I want to go off to Georgia. And for Georgia, it's very similar to North Carolina, although I don't see as much of Hurricane Helene being an impact on the state of Georgia. But I will say though that Brian Kemp and Donald Trump seem to have made amends, as Josh pointed out earlier. And I think that Donald Trump should win this by like 2.5% based on those odds. Personally, a county for me to watch is Cobb County and DeKalb County, just to see how much of that Democratic turnout there's going to be. But I think it's going to be more favorable for Trump, and therefore I'm going to say that Georgia is a lean for Trump. Okay. Then I want to go to Michigan. And Michigan's a completely different state from North Carolina and Georgia because Michigan is a state where there's a lot of Arab voters. And I know the Arab vote is completely demoralized right now, but I think at the end of the day, they're going to be voting for a lesser of two evils, as they think. And I think that's what's going to push Harris over the top. I can't vote for Trump winning Michigan based on like the fact that there's a chance. I gotta feel more confident about it. And right now what my gut's telling me is that Harris is going to win it. And then we move over to Arizona. Arizona has more registered Republicans than registered Democrats in the state. And I think there's more registered Republicans and than registered Democrats and registered independents in Arizona. And I think through that, and I think because there's a lot of turnover, there's a lot of voter turnover. And I know Carrie Lake isn't running the best campaign right now. She's running a really bad campaign actually. But even still, I think you're going to see a lot of Trump Gallego voters. And so as a result, I see Arizona I think I'm going to see Arizona doing a tilt red. It's looking very favorable for Trump at the polls, although I don't trust the polls as much just because they're still very, very close. I just don't trust the polls as much. But for off of gut feeling alone, I guess I got to go with Arizona. And then I want to move over to Nevada. And all summer, I have been saying that there's going to be a red Nevada. The only reason why Nevada didn't go completely red in 2022 was because of that snowstorm and all of that. And I know I mentioned earlier that Harris's easiest state to win is Nevada, if not Michigan. But I'm still gonna pick Nevada for Trump because I really want to call it. I really I feel like the early voting turnout it looks good right now. I'm not gonna completely rely on that, but B, I kind of just want to like make it like an I told you so. You know what I mean? Like I kind of just want to feel like I kind of just want to tell everybody like, yeah, I called this state since like way long ago. I told you it was gonna be red, and I think Nevada's gonna go tilt red. I think this is gonna be the year Nevada finally goes red. Hopefully. And then goes Wisconsin. And I'm just gonna say it flat out. I think Wisconsin's gonna go tilt Harris. And this is just off of my gut. I really think that, especially in terms of marijuana legalization, the younger voters they're going to go out and vote on that issue. They're going to vote on the issue. And I think that this is going to be a very interesting county to watch. I think right now, like the two counties to watch, especially, are Door County and Sauk County. And Sauk County is a county that's in between Madison and Milwaukee. And Door County is over by like Green Bay. Those are bellwether counties, and they voted for Obama in 2012, they voted for Trump in 2016, and they voted for Biden in 2020. So seeing how those counties go, it's going to really, I really think those counties are going to they're going to decide the election. But I think as of right now, based on how the younger vote's getting more and more engaged in politics, and I think how they're going to be voting on the issue, especially on the referendums, which for for the big referendum in Wisconsin is going to be marijuana legalization. I think that right now Harris has the tilt advantage, which goes down to Pennsylvania. And I think this election is fully decided on the state of Pennsylvania. And two big counties to watch for Pennsylvania is going to be Erie County and it's going to be Northampton County. Northampton County is situated, I think it's just above Bucks County. It borders the Delaware River. It's on the very eastern part of Pennsylvania, whereas Erie County is a county that's situated on Lake Erie. It's in between Buffalo and Cleveland. And these are two counties in Pennsylvania that are on the completely opposite ends of the state, but they share one thing in common, and that's that they're both bellwether counties. They voted for Obama in 2012, they voted for Trump in 2016, and they voted for Biden in 2020. And I know you can mention Philadelphia County. What's the Philadelphia turnout going to be? You can mention Bucks County. You can mention Lackawanna County because those are both swing counties. But at the end of the day, I think those are the two counties that are going to be the big indicators on who is going to win the election. And I feel like right now, based on how McCormick's campaign is going against Bob Casey's not running a good campaign. McCormick is surprising a lot of people, and I'd be surprised if he won, but I wouldn't be like completely shocked. My jaw wouldn't drop if he won. And based on the fact that GOP is doing a lot better in Pennsylvania this year than in past election years, I'm going to say Pennsylvania wins on a tilt margin. And I think that gives Trump 287 and that gives Harris 251. And the state is completely decided on the state of Pennsylvania. I think Pennsylvania is the last of these states to be called, if not Arizona. But it's going to go down to the wire for sure. And off of gut feeling, I think Trump has the slight advantage. I know other people can argue that Harris would have the slight advantage, but for me, based on this moment, it's got to be Trump having the slight advantage.
Okay, so starting this map off, the Democrats start with 226 electoral votes, Republicans 219. The only states that have any chance of going either way this election are the Big Seven: Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. So I'm not going to be talking about any other states, such as Virginia. A lot of talk about Virginia getting closer this time around, which I think is very likely. The only thing is that Biden won this state by 10 points. I don't really see any reality in which Trump makes up 10 plus points of ground to flip Virginia. So, yeah, that's as much as I'm going to say on Virginia, and that's as much as I'm going to say on any other state outside of the swing states, with the exception of Florida, which I do believe will go to Trump by over 10 points after seeing the early vote data. Okay, we're going to start this off with the state of Nevada. This is a state that has not voted Republican in 20 years, which is a little crazy to think about, but it's true. And really, all I have to go off of Nevada is vibes and early vote data. Now, Josh went a lot off of the data. Mark went a lot off of vibes. I'm going to do a little bit of both. As I see it in Nevada right now, I see it's going to be very close, very close. Either Harris is going to win it very, very marginally, or Trump will win it relatively marginally. And a few things to consider in Nevada. The Culinary Union. The Culinary Union in Nevada actually said right now that Trump is favored. Now, when everyone believed that Laxalt was going to take Nevada in 2022, they said he wouldn't. They were right. And I forget the name of the Nevada Oracle. We were just talking about him earlier. But he also says Democrats are looking like Ralston? Mm-hmm. Ralston. The Nevada Oracle Ralston says the Democrats are looking like they're in trouble in Nevada from the early vote data, which I believe Republicans are leading overall at this point in time, which is pretty wild. So as of right now, I believe heavy working class population, a lot of unions in Nevada. And I just believe overall, I think Donald Trump will take the state. I think he'll take it by a very slim margin, under a point. So I'll put it in that tilt Republican category. I do believe trends with Hispanics, while in general, I don't know how much Trump will gain with Hispanics. I do believe he will gain this time around, and that will also help him get just over the edge in Nevada to take that state this time around. So we're going to move next to its neighbor, Arizona. This is a state, I believe, demographics wise, the most Republican state. I'm not sure if that's 100% true, but most Republican state, or one of the most Republican states among these big seven. And a lot of these Republican voters, I will note, are, as you would describe, McCain Republicans. Famously, many people, including myself, believe that the reason Kari Lake lost the governorship in 2022 is because she decided to disregard these McCain voters. And actually, I think she said she didn't want their vote. And look how that turned out for her. Very, very smart for Kari Lake. But for Arizona, you are seeing increased Republican turnout this time around across the board around the swing states, especially in the early voting. But for Arizona in specific, this was a state that was trending in regards to registration data. Democrats were supposed to actually take a lead, but they turned a corner, I believe, a couple years ago. And Republicans have since netted, I think, around 200,000 registrations in between since the last presidential election, which is pretty wild. And the ground game in Arizona on the Republican side has been pretty great. Not to mention, I already mentioned in Nevada, the trends with Hispanics favoring Donald Trump. So overall, I think, look, Joe Biden won Arizona by 0.24, I believe, percentage points. This is one of, if not the easiest state, I believe, for Donald Trump to flip back into his column. I believe he will take it by around 2 points, give or take, maybe a little bit under, a little bit over. As I see it right now, I believe Arizona is basically locked up for Trump. Moving on to the state of Georgia. Georgia is a very heavily black populated state, and that is what carried Joe Biden to his very marginal victory in 2020. Now, going off of early vote data, more and more each day, Democrats' black turnout for in general is down. It's down relatively significantly, and it's actually getting more and more pronounced each day. And this is obviously very, very bad for Harris. You're going to need that black vote if you're going to win a usually Republican state like the state of Georgia. You also have the governor, Brian Kemp, who is now, I believe, on better terms with Trump. Since then, Brian Kemp and Trump have decided to put aside their differences to go ahead and go out there and win that state of Georgia for the better of the country. And I believe that the state of Georgia will go to Donald Trump by around 2.5 points. You look at RCP average right now at this point in time, it's Trump plus 2.4. Georgia has actually been almost dead on, I believe, in the polling aggregate in the past 2 election cycles. It's been the most accurate state in terms of polling. So I go ahead and put Georgia in that lean Republican column right now. Noting, so I've just gone over the Sun Belt. I've been refraining from saying this the entire video, but I think the Sun Belt is basically at this point, it's on lock for Donald Trump. Nevada is debatable, but even then, I think that Trump's going to take Nevada. This election is going to come down to the 3 Rust Belt blue wall states. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with the state of Michigan, which is an interesting state because Trump is pulling ahead in Michigan. And until today, Harris had actually not led a poll in the state of Michigan since September, which is very interesting. Very interesting indeed. Then we got Bloomberg and Quinnipiac, notoriously left-leaning pollsters coming out and giving Harris enough to narrow that margin down, and Trump currently leads by 0.2%, essentially a toss-up. Now, regarding the Arab and the Muslim vote, I've seen polls that show that Trump is marginally winning the Arab vote. A poll recently came out that he's 45% to Harris is 43%. And more specifically, among the Muslim vote, I actually saw a poll that Jill Stein was winning the majority or the plurality of the Muslim vote, which is hard to believe. Is it possible? We're going to have to wait and see. It sounds very implausible to me personally. Again, we're going to have to wait and see. Obviously, the Israel-Palestine conflict has been a major, major issue over the past year. Muslim voters are not happy about the Democrats' support of Israel, and that could come into play. It could hurt them in the state of Michigan. It certainly could. You also have, worth noting, that the Muslim majority city of Hamtramck, the Democrat mayor recently came out and endorsed Donald Trump. How much weight does his endorsement hold? I'm not so certain. I think it's more indicative of a a greater shift we're seeing maybe among Muslims in general. They are by nature religious, and the culture is more conservative. Could that play a factor in Trump winning Michigan? It could. I think Michigan is fundamentals wise Harris's easiest state for her to pick off, and I think she could easily win it. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to have to deviate from Mark and Josh here on this one. I think Donald Trump's going to win the state by around half a point. It could be just under that. I think Trump's going to take Michigan, and moving on to the state of Wisconsin now. Now, if you go ahead and look at the RCP average in the state of Wisconsin, Trump leads by 0.1. That is a functional tie. 6 out of the 8 polls in the 2-week aggregate, or actually it looks like a 3-week aggregate, but 6 out of the 8 polls are ties, which is insane. And I think it's worth noting that in 2016 and 2020, the polls underestimated Donald Trump by 6 points, both times, essentially, in the state of Wisconsin. Now, there's a question, is that going to carry over to this election cycle? Personally, I'm not so certain. I'm not convinced. And the reason that I say that is because Trump won Wisconsin, I believe, by less than a point in 2016. It was relatively close. In fact, I'm not so certain on that, but I know in 2020 that Biden did win the state by around 0.6%. Wisconsin is a very, very tight state. And I do believe right now it is functionally a toss-up. I am not convinced. I believe the state, I believe it's got very Republican aspects. It's got very Democrat aspects. You have the city of Madison, Democrat stronghold. You have the Driftless area, I believe, in the West, very Republican, very white working class. You got two worlds clashing here in Wisconsin, and who's ultimately gonna come out and win this thing. For Wisconsin, I do believe I saw some early vote data that shows that the Republican areas in the, I believe, Waukesha, there's a few others I'm forgetting at the moment, Republican turnout or turnout in these Republican counties is very high. It's very good for the GOP, continuing this trend that we're seeing across all the swing states and beyond. I will note, though, I believe turnout is also doing relatively well in the city of Milwaukee, adding to that toss-up aspect. So when it comes down to Wisconsin, I've said it a million times, it's a toss-up. At the end of the day, I think, I have Michigan going Republican. I think the blue wall, it will usually fall together. And I do believe the macro environment this time around favors Donald Trump. And again, even if Wisconsin is off on the polling by about 1 point right now, or even half a point in Trump's favor, Trump's going to win that state. I think Trump can go out there. I think he can take Wisconsin. I think he can, but I do want to emphasize, like Michigan, Harris could very well win it. Now, the state of Pennsylvania, the Keystone State in both name and function. Let's talk about Pennsylvania. This is a state that is going to win Harris the election. It's going to win Trump the election, depending on who takes it. Now, early vote data. Pennsylvania, I believe they have they're only mail, but they can do a early in person by going to the courthouse, I believe, and filling out the mail and turning it in person. But you look at the stats here, and Republicans are doing significantly better than they were in both 2022 and 2020, and Democrats are doing significantly worse than they were. There's been an overall shift towards the GOP in this data, which benefits Trump, obviously. Now, I will say, Pennsylvania is an ancestrally Democratic state. However, however, it is a moderate Democrat state. The governor's race 2022, they elected a moderate Democrat, Josh Shapiro. Regardless of whether you believe that's true or not, perceived moderate Josh Shapiro versus radical Republican Doug Mastriano, which is a big reason why he lost by the margin that he did. I also heard that Pennsylvania is, in regards to other states, they are actually more apprehensive on electing women to a statewide office or in, I believe, higher office, which is something interesting to consider. I'm not sure how true that is, but it would lend more to the moderate kind of persona Pennsylvania's got going on right now. You also have a few. You have the Polish community in Pennsylvania, heavy Polish community, which is typically a bellwether voting bloc. Trump won it in 2016. Biden took it in 2020. And I do believe right now that Donald Trump has the advantage with these kinds of voters, because you look at 2020, Joe Biden, Scranton Joe, he spent most of his political career in Delaware, but that's Delaware right next to Philadelphia. You got that area. Joe Biden's been running ads in that area for decades. They are familiar with Joe Biden. He comes off as a nice, Obama Democrat, moderate, older white guy. He has really big mass appeal, and he was born in Scranton, which is a huge reason why I believe Joe Biden took Pennsylvania in 2020. Now, Kamala Harris, on the other hand, is a San Francisco Democrat. She's more radical than Joe Biden. I believe that's safe to say. And I believe the Pennsylvania voters, I believe that Kamala Harris isn't as palatable to them as someone like Donald Trump, who, Kamala Harris, she could be a little bit of a radical unknown, whereas Donald Trump, you kind of know what you're getting for the most part. They can talk about how Donald Trump's going to, end democracy, this, that, and otherwise, but he was in office for 4 years. And how do the Pennsylvania voters feel about that? You also have heavy white working class in the state of Pennsylvania, which could really help Trump. And another voting bloc are the Amish, which is, interestingly enough, are they're registering to vote at numbers we've never seen before, which is something very interesting. I believe in 2020, only 50,000 Amish were registered to vote, and now 150,000 more, for a total of 200,000 are now registered to vote. Another thing about the Amish is you're not going to see them in the polls, obviously. So how do I feel about the state of Pennsylvania? Now, I actually believe that the state of Pennsylvania is going to end up being the most Republican of the blue wall in this election cycle. I believe Donald Trump will take the state by just over a point, somewhere between a point and a half. I just don't believe that Kamala Harris is, she's not to put it plain and simple, she's not a good fit for the state. So that's my prediction for the 2024 presidential election. I believe Donald Trump will take it with 312 electoral votes to Kamala Harris's 226. And that concludes my analysis.
All right, well, thank you, Ben. Thank you, Mark. If you've enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and share. We have some historical presidential videos you can check out as well about politics, and those will be returning sometime, hopefully in November, once the election dies down. Our next video will be covering the presidency of Barack Obama, and then we'll go from there. In the meantime, you can follow me on Twitter. You can stick around, because we'll be doing live streams leading up to the election, discussing new developments. Of course, we'll be live on election night. I mean, seriously. Ben also recorded his own independent video that I will be posting. And additionally, I'll be doing some kind of Senate video as well, just discussing the state of the Senate. If you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and we will see you next time.